Hey everybody, let's talk Portuguese. That's right, I'm back with another video about the differences between European and Brazilian Portuguese. Today I wanted to talk about pronunciation differences between European and Brazilian Portuguese and how that affects how we write certain words. I'm talking about words that in one variety might have an extra letter, whereas in the other variety it might be dropped. That's right, we're talking about the famous silent letters. English has its own plethora of these, such as the B in doubt, but the difference there is that we don't have other varieties of English where they say doubt. In Portuguese, however, we do have a bit of a scramble and confusion going on, so we're going to be talking about that today. However, before we get into talking about that, I wanted to briefly talk about what is known as the Acordo Ortográfico de 1990. This is what we call in English the Portuguese Language Orthographic Agreement of 1990. What this is a multinational treaty signed onto by all of the countries in the world that have Portuguese as an official language. This agreement serves to harmonize the way that Portuguese is spelled across all countries in order to facilitate communication and the free flow of goods and services. The thinking behind it is that if Portuguese is spelled in a harmonious and consistent way across all territories where Portuguese is spoken, it will be easier for people to understand each other in a context in which many varieties of Portuguese have a problem of mutual understanding. However, the Acordo Ortográfico and its simplifications to the orthography of Portuguese is a very controversial reform, and it is one that has generated not just a lot of consternation, but also confusion about how we are supposed to correctly be writing certain words. That being said, let's get started. In a lot of cases, the extra letter in Portugal may or may not be spoken. It is simply up to the speaker and their home accent. You will also notice that there are patterns of certain letters and certain kinds of words dealing with these extra sounds or not. That is not a coincidence, but I don't have enough time to explain the etymology behind all of them in this video. That being said, although some words can be said either way in Portugal, in Brazil this is very often not the case, and they have just one pronunciation for these words. This is the case with words like perspectiva, which can be said perspectiva or perspectiva in Portugal, but in Brazil would be simply perspectiva. It's the same thing with the word expectativa or expectativa, which in Brazil is always expectativa. It is also often the case that not only these words, but their derivatives follow these patterns of pronunciation. So when we have words like perfectivo, if you are saying perfectivo and not perfectivo, you simply need to be careful and make sure that you're saying the same variety in all cases. In the case of this word, the only variant in Brazil that is accepted is perfectivo. But that also leads us into words like carácter or caráter and táctil and tátil. In Brazil, again, the standard is to drop the extra letter and say tátil or caráter. Now you will notice that this extra letter is often a C or a P, and we're going to be continuing along with plenty of other words in which that is the case. That is also true of words where in Portugal this extra letter is always said, and in Brazil it is not, such as in the case of the word facto. If you're talking about the facts in Portugal, you would say factos, but in Brazil that is fato. This is complicated by the fact that the word fato also means suit, such as in the word fato de banho. In Portugal, a fato is a fato, it is just something you wear, but in Brazil you need context to make sure that you're properly distinguishing between them. Similarly, in Portugal, when we are on our phones and we are looking to get a hold of one of our friends, we would go into our contactos and find our friend, but in Brazil that would be contato. Something subtle in Portugal is subtil, but in Brazil it would be sutil. Amnesty in Portugal is amnistia with an M, whereas in Brazil it is anistia with just an N. That is also the case for indemnização, which in Portugal includes the M, and in Brazil is indenização with no M. There are many more words like this, but let's move on to the words that in Portugal the extra letter is rarely said. This includes words where that is a point of contention, but in the standard variety of the language is the case, such as in the words recessão, percepção, concessão, and excepção, and also their other derivative forms, which are preferably said in Brazil recepção, percepção, concepção, and excepção. For example, when we're talking about derivatives, we're talking about words like excepcional or excepcional. In Portugal, the preference is to drop the letter and say excepcional, and in Brazil, the preference is to keep the letter and say excepcional. In Brazil, it's easy enough, you say the P and move on with your life, but in Portugal, either way goes, just be careful not to confuse confuse those words with other words that sound the same but are spelled differently. For example, concessão with C cedilha is not the same thing as concessão with two S's, just the same way that recessão with C cedilha is not the same thing as recessão with a double S. We also have other words with that same C, such as aspecto in Portugal versus aspecto in Brazil. The prickly succulents in Portugal are called catuj, but in Brazil they would be called cactus. As in the case of the other categories of words, there are many more examples of words that I could give you, but I wanted to round this video off with just one more word that doesn't necessarily neatly fit into this theme. I want to talk about the verb distinguir, which doesn't necessarily have any hidden or silent letters, but it does have a silent vowel that in Brazil seemingly has activated itself among a large swathe of the population. In Portugal, the only acceptable variant of this word is distinguir, but in Brazil, many people say distinguir. There's nothing exceptionally wrong about saying distinguir. However, if you are looking to speak carefully and looking to speak technically correctly, you might want to catch yourself and say distinguir. The shift in Brazil from distinguir to distinguir is a great example of how language evolves, and that is a topic that I'm going to be bringing up in future videos. I'm going to be doing videos about the evolution of Portuguese and some of the reasons why Portuguese is so different between Portugal and Brazil. So keep your eyes peeled for that, but for now, that's all I've got for this edition of the differences between European and Brazilian Portuguese. If you have something to add to or comment on the topic of today's video, I would love it if you left me a comment down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, if you learned something or otherwise found it interesting, give me a thumbs up down below. You might think about subscribing to my channel if you're not already. I make videos about food, culture, and the Portuguese language on my channel, and you can find those videos in playlists directly on my channel or in the eye above, and I will see you next time.